What historical mystery is unlikely to ever be solved? Story 1. The precise location of Genghis Khan's tomb. Not long ago, I viewed a documentary on CuriosityStream that discussed this very topic. On top of Burkhan Khaldun, Genghis Khan's beloved mountain, lies a mound where he and a small number of his descendants were laid to rest. After being forced to flee as a boy, he sought refuge on that mountain, which he later revered as a hallowed site. Getting even somewhat near to it still requires special authorization from the government. What a fascinating experience. Story 2, I'll admit that reading through the comments and exploring them took up a lot of my time. You all taught me a lot, and I'm grateful. On the other hand, I opted not to since I don't think we'll ever find the answers to most of these questions. The tomb of Alexander the Great is my personal old one. That has always been a mystery to me, and I've wondered if we would ever uncover it, because I've always had an interest in classics. There is more than enough for me in the more recent one, which is more challenging. I'm from New Zealand, therefore it's a mystery there. Kursa Yensen, a 14-year-old girl who was riding her horse when she vanished in 1983, is the subject of this case. Unsolved disappearances of this kind are extremely rare in New Zealand, making this one all the more noteworthy. She went horseback riding on the evening of September 1st, 1983, as previously mentioned. Her horse was later found alive, but she has remained missing ever since. I, too, believe that she was taken and killed that night, as all indications point to foul play. Regrettably, it is highly unlikely that we will ever find out. In that case, it should be mentioned that John Russell, a man with a prior conviction, was considered a suspect by the police. They searched his home and truck, but they didn't find any proof that Kursa had been there. In 1985, Russell confessed to the ending, but later retracted it, and the police never had enough evidence to bring charges against him. In the end, the authorities concluded that there was more evidence indicating his innocence than guilt. However, he committed suicide in 1992 without leaving a message or final confession. Maybe if he did it, he could no longer bear the guilt. Again, it's quite improbable that we will ever find out. He probably took any knowledge he had to his grave. Story 3. When you consider all the evidence surrounding Lizzie Borden's parents' murders, you come to terms with the fact that no one knows for sure what happened until 130 years after the event, if we don't discover a written confession. Adding insult to injury, the majority of the police squad failed to arrive because they were at a fair. Lizzie, who was experiencing hysterics, was given morphine by the on-site doctor, rendering her statements at the scene meaningless. The bodies were left unrefrigerated for more than 5 days by the coroner. Two things appear to be confirmed by the timeline at the same time. It is quite unlikely that an outsider could have entered the residence, murdered two individuals, and then emerged covered in blood without drawing the attention of numerous witnesses. Prior to the arrival of the police and doctor, no one on the premises could have murdered two individuals and utterly destroyed all evidence. People are making things out to be more complicated than it actually is. It's a huge disaster. Story 4. The pre-Pharaoh nomadic people of Lake Faiyum vanished without a trace. They existed only in the area surrounding an old lake and the banks of the Nile. They did not have any written language or other documents. They were a long-established society that practiced agriculture, weaving, baking, and had elements of religion and art. All of a sudden, the humans disappeared. They failed to remove the fish from the cooking pots, the dry food from under the floorboards, and the pottery from the wheel. It seemed as if someone had scooped them up and whisked them away, or the people had hurriedly departed, leaving everything behind. As a result, early pre-pharaonic Egyptian kingdoms' material culture emerged not long after. Some think the Faiyum people moved north to become the early Egyptians due to abnormally dry conditions. Others say they were defeated or captured. However, there is no evidence of fighting, and the fact that they had and left no weapons begs the question of why they preserved their complete culture. Story 5. Even if Rasputin removed the king's son's aspirin to alleviate his hemophilia, how could he have known to do so? I don't understand how he managed to become so close to the royal family without anyone noticing until it was all reported. The advisors of Tsar Nicholas failed to detect any impropriety in the Tsar's association with a homeless magician. If the narrative is genuine, then many concerns remain unanswered, such as how he actually died and how he managed to escape the poison and shot. Rasputin undoubtedly caused some eyebrows to rise at the royal court. With the exception of the Tsar's closest associates, he was a total creep around a group of wealthy women. Despite Nicholas and Alexandra's desperation and naivete, he was seductive and promised great things. Rasputin is one of those historical figures who feels more like a legend than a real person, and that's exactly why his story is so baffling. The aspirin theory is especially eerie. Back then, no one knew that aspirin thins the blood, which would have made the Tsarevich's hemophilia much worse. Whether by luck, intuition, or sheer coincidence, Rasputin's advice to stop using it actually helped the boy. That single act cemented his reputation as a healer in Alexandra's eyes. Story 6. The reasons behind Henry VIII's insanity. He envisioned himself as the ideal medieval prince, but unlike his French adversary, he did not exercise absolute monarchy. Even though his nephew Charles V was wealthier, he was still quite wealthy. In battle, he failed to match Henry V's success. To sum up, he was perpetually second best despite being a physically dominant 6-foot-plus king. His inability to start a new dynasty with an heir put the nation at risk of civil war and ended his reign prematurely. Even though he wasn't the first to arrive, he was the backup because his older brother had already perished. On top of that, a jousting accident probably left him with brain damage. We could delve further, but I think we've covered enough to move on. Story 7. This is not the first time I've made this post. The mystery surrounding the Somerton man's identity, that guy from Somerton, Tamam Shud, just incredibly strange and unsettling. It has an X-Files feel to it. On an Australian beach, a lifeless body of a well-dressed athletic man was discovered resting against a seawall. Despite the autopsy, the reason of death remains unknown. A piece of paper reading Taman Shud was discovered in his pocket. He lacked identification and no clothing labels. As of now, nobody has gone missing. At a later date, a briefcase and some clothing marked T are discovered in a locker at a rail station that is thought to have belonged to him. No one named Keane has been reported missing. One of the residents in the region where the man died discovers a strange book in the backseat of his car after news of the note breaks. The torn page and the scrap of paper are identical. Along with a phone number, the book has a peculiar cipher that has remained unsolved. It is unlikely that he died with his head supported against the wall, as evidenced by the pooling of blood in his body. A partially lighted cigarette slipped out of his lips, although it would be slightly strange if he passed away in a different posture. Everyone paid a lot of attention to the embalmed body that was on exhibit for 6 months, but nobody could place him. He has never been located, and no one who knew him has either. If you want a basic translation, the end times is what Tamam Shud means. Story 8. Who destroyed Nikola Tesla's life's work and sent him into a severe despair in 1895 by arsonally burning down his 6-story laboratory. Following this tragic setback, Tesla lost interest in science and moved farther away from the elite as he developed a fascination with the occult and pseudoscience. Theoretically, several of Tesla's rivals and enemies, of whom he had a handful, could have been responsible for the arson. Not only was Tesla notorious for causing waves in the thriving American tech industry, but he was also likely very autistic, which led him to often unintentionally upset many people, particularly those he was trying to displace. So anyone might have ignited the fire. If a rival company had done it, they would have hired an opportunist to do it covertly, making themselves virtually impossible to find. However, in my opinion, Edison was the one. Story 9, in case you didn't know, Bairn is the Scots term for child. And so we have the Unknown Bairn. Scots is a separate language from English. It has been somewhat diluted by the British in the 18th and 19th centuries, and coincidentally by Andrew Carnegie as well, but many people still speak and understand it. Along the north coast of Fife in 1971, a father, son, and dog were strolling along the beach when they noticed something vibrant in the sea. In a state of panic, the father sent his kid racing home while he examined the lifeless body of a boy, roughly 2 or 3 years old. Despite a nationwide appeal for anyone to come forward, a tremendous effort to identify the youngster was fruitless. There must have been others in the child's life who were grieving his loss. 2 persons were detained but then released on suspicion that the baby belonged to a traveling family. His clothes were old, worn out, and probably made in Britain. The infant likely died in Scotland and floated downstream, according to assumptions about ocean currents and the fact that the body had been in the sea for around 6 weeks, rather than being washed up from a wreck or continental Europe. Donations from all throughout Scotland helped pay for the child's funeral expenses. In memory of the unknown bairn, a wee boy, is the printed message on the stone. Many were saddened that he was laid to rest in a lonely section of the cemetery. They are laid to rest side by side because the man who discovered his body requested to be buried next to him when he passed away. He is no longer on his own. Story 10, nobody knows how much of the past it contains. Wow, even without the powers that be, there was still a lot that didn't reach us. How much data simply did not survive the test of time, considering how much has endured? Earthquakes and other natural disasters have erased a large number of cave paintings. In a sinkhole, how many pyramids ended up in the bottom? With the passing of each generation, how many family tales perished? These days, it's so easy to share our narrative. This thought hits like a quiet thunderclap. Most of human history is gone. When you think about all the stories, discoveries, and lives that never made it through the fragile filter of time, lost to floods, fires, decay, or just never being written down, it's staggering. Cave paintings crumbled. Oral histories faded as generations died. Entire cities swallowed by the earth. What we do know feels monumental, but it's really just a tiny fraction of what once existed. And that makes every artifact, every scroll, every scrap of pottery we find so precious. They're whispers from the past that somehow escaped the silence. But a lot of stories have just vanished. Story 11, what was wrong with Joan of Arc? A little girl has a vision in which angels urge her to conquer the British, whom they call pigs, and lead France to triumph. What she said. In the end, this motivates the girl, who is only 17 years old, to become France's greatest fighter during the 100-year battle with England. And she does it by repeatedly defeating the English. Her voices begin to resurface for her. The angels warn her that she will be the object of captivity and pain. She is taken prisoner the very day after she fights, and after a lengthy and arduous trial, she is burned at the stake at the age of 19 for being a witch. Because the British couldn't bear to admit defeat at the hands of a teenage girl, they assumed Joan was being led astray by the devil. Joan was led to believe that the voices she was hearing were not from the archangels, when in fact they were. However, it is from Satan. Okay then. Could you please tell me the nature and origin of these voices? Despite the fact that Joan was socially active, incredibly down to earth, and organized with her soldiers, not to mention having good handwriting, written documents disprove the theory that she suffered from schizophrenia. Tell me what those voices were and how they came to be. Story 13, the fate of Shelly Miscavige, Scientology leader David Miscavige's wife, who has gone missing. Constantly by his side like a first lady of Scientology, she made a few executive decisions without David's approval somewhere in 2007 for reasons nobody can explain. Following her attendance at her father's burial in August of that year, she mysteriously disappeared. Even though they won't tell the media or her friends where she is right now, the organization of Scientology has denied that she has gone missing and claimed that she is working behind the scenes for the organization. Those who were a part of the group in the past have complained that their inquiries on her were either disregarded or downplayed. In 2013, someone reported a missing person, however the case was swiftly dismissed and deemed unsubstantiated. Shelly Miscavige has remained mysterious for more than a decade. Story 14, historical and continuing concerns include the fate of the women and girls who went missing along the Highway of Tears in northern British Columbia, Canada. Madison Scott's case in Vanderhoof, British Columbia, is one of several unsolved disappearances of women along Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert, British Columbia, throughout the past 2 decades. Up until recently, the only ones discovered were fragments. Someone abandoned a girl outside of Smithers, BC, while tying a dog to her. It was inevitable that the dog would live. The lack of attention it receives is quite disturbing. Story 15, a sword bears an engraved message, but no language has been found to explain it, and finding that language is becoming increasingly improbable with the passage of time. In my nation, there is a book that is thought to be one of the earliest works of Renaissance literature, and the original manuscript is probably lost. The exact burial site of a certain king cannot be located due to a lack of documentation, although there is a theory that the book I mentioned earlier contains information about how multiple coffins were made to make it impossible for the enemy to determine the king's whereabouts. Since the book's author was a prominent figure during her reign, this is exactly the kind of mystery that makes history feel alive. A handful of cryptic clues, a missing manuscript, and secrets buried with a king, or, in this case, a queen. The engraved sword with an unreadable language is haunting. Every year that passes without a translation makes it feel like we're staring through a window we can't open, knowing there's a story on the other side that might never be told. And the book? That's the stuff of legends. A Renaissance-era manuscript, possibly the key to a royal burial shrouded in deliberate misdirection. Multiple coffins, hidden locations. It sounds like something out of an epic novel, but this is real life. Just lost to time. The monarch in question was a woman. Story 16. From what I've read, there was this guy who seemed to be from another time. One day, in the middle of a bustling city, this guy in old clothes showed up. He was as surprised and nervous as any country bumpkin visiting the city for the first time. Unfortunately, he was clumsy and died instantly from his injuries. The authorities retrieved a token and an address from his clothing. The token belonged to Ware, who had used it decades ago to buy alcohol. When they asked the owner of the address what had happened to his father, he revealed that he had gone for an evening stroll 30 years ago and never returned. Story 17. During the late glacial interstadial, was there any kind of civilization? Therefore, the chronology is as follows. BP = years before present. Subglacial era, cold. Warm, late glacial interstadial period. Colder, younger Dryas. Holocene epoch, wet. We know that early Holocene humans began to establish permanent settlements, cultivate crops, and build small towns. It is likely that Jericho was established around approximately 11,600 BP, 9,600 BCE, and Göbekli Tepe around approximately 11,500 BP. Even though it took thousands of years longer, the first cities were undoubtedly more than just a collection of huts. Examples of such cities are Sumer and Thebes, Luxor. Additionally, it is known that during the Younger Dryas, people were forced to seek refuge in secluded regions and were fighting for survival. When it comes to the glacial period, the same holds true. The late glacial interstadial was as warm as the early Holocene, yet to this day, very little is known about it. Over the course of 1800 years, it was warm. Were organized cities or tiny prehistoric civilizations able to make do with that? Did they master metalworking and long-distance trade? Possess works of art? Supreme beings? Civil war? As a result of the Younger Dryas glacial period and the passage of time, it is highly unlikely that any proof will ever be found. Story 18. Horizon of a Burned House. The Cucuteni Tripillion were the most well-known of a group of Neolithic European tribes that frequently set fire to their own cities. Building a city or town, the Cucuteni Tripillion would inhabit there for 75-80 years before destroying it in a fire, relocating, and starting over. They would occasionally return to a city they had previously burned down and reconstruct it in the same manner. In one location, they allegedly repeated this process 8 or 9 times. Why is a mystery to us. Like you, we have no idea how. The clay in the walls was vitrified and turned into pottery by the flames they set, but we still don't know how they managed to use the materials available to them to create fires that burned hot enough. Story 19. On my behalf, Louis Le Prince. He is revered as the father of cinematography due to his groundbreaking work in the field of motion pictures. In 1888, he shot the brief Leeds Bridge scene and the renowned Roundhay Garden piece. He was supposed to go to the US to show off his innovations, but he never got around to it. Aboard September 16, 1890, in Dijon, France, he was last seen getting aboard a train. Many people have proposed explanations for his disappearance, the most well-known of which is that Thomas Edison orchestrated a premeditated murder. Story 20. Viewer of the past. An overwhelming number. We have a limited understanding of an excessive amount of topics, and it is quite probable that we are clueless about much more than that. We have no idea what questions to ask or what the riddles are when it comes to the thousands of years of rich history that remains largely unknown to us. The only reason we discovered the world's oldest city is because a man stumbled upon it while running from bandits. We have discovered very little, even using satellite photography. The sheer number of kingdoms, dynasties, and entire worlds about which we know incredibly little, if anything at all, is difficult to put into words. The tomb, sarcophagus, and resting place of Alexander the Great, or any other notable person from before 1000 CE for that matter, would likely. This perfectly captures the humbling vastness of what we don't know. For every ancient city, empire, or dynasty we've uncovered, there are probably dozens, maybe hundreds, that have been erased, buried, or simply never stumbled upon. The idea that the world's oldest city was found by accident while someone was running from bandits says it all. If not for sheer chance, that entire chapter of history would still be silent. What's mind-blowing is that even with satellites, LiDAR, and modern tech, we've barely scratched the surface. Whole civilizations are waiting under deserts, jungles, and oceans, completely hidden. Story 21. It was the Franklin expedition that went missing. We know that the expedition was conducting a magnetic and geographical survey and that they spent the winter trapped in pack ice due to a series of harsh winters. They alighted from the ships at some point in an effort to make this several hundred-mile trek across land to Backsfish River. The captain, along with 9 crew members and 14 other officers, had already perished. There seems to be evidence that some men walked back to the ships, but we don't know why they left, how far they got. They didn't get to the river, or how far they actually went. For those with a few hours to kill, it's an excellent rabbit hole to explore. Story 22. Battle of Batavia, 870, similar to the massacre at Ustica. On June 27, 1980, an unidentified DC-9 carrying 81 people went down in the Tyrrhenian Sea. According to the scenario, a NATO fighter fired down the missile when it was in the midst of a dogfight with planes from Libya, the United States, and France. The airport and radar records from that day have vanished, and a Libyan MiG-15 crashed in Calabria. So, it is likely that the Americans are trying to cover up a huge blunder, but until the French or the Americans engage in dialogue, we will never know for sure. Story 23. Madeleine McCann's abduction. I really think her mom has no idea anything is going on, and I have a sneaking suspicion that the father is involved. I find something really strange about him. It is ridiculous how many people have edited photographs and videos of possible suspects who appear identical to him. A part of me really wishes that she is still alive and well somewhere, and that we can find each other again someday. Also, I really hope that her parents are innocent. From what we know thus far, though, it appears that they or he are the ones involved, and that there was foul play. They probably wanted to go out with friends that night, and, as doctors, offered her medication to help her relax and get some sleep. Whatever it was, she reacted negatively. Returning to the room to observe the children was a common occurrence for them. He was terrified that they would lose all they had worked for, including the other kids and their practice licenses, when he returned and saw that she had passed. He seemed to have taken an excessively long time during his turn to check on the kids, and when he returned, their friends' turns to do the same. And all of a sudden, she wasn't there. Story 24, the theft from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum seems like a solid choice, though it's early to tell. It just took 81 minutes from beginning to end for the largest art robbery in contemporary history. It was 1:24 in the morning. 2 guys entered Boston's Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum on March 18, 1990, while dressed as police officers. In the museum's basement, they duct taped 2 victims to a pipe and a workbench after they assaulted 2 naive night security guards. Their theft could be worth up to $500 million and includes pieces by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Degas, and Manet. I don't know who did this or why. What became of the artwork? You probably couldn't sell a single item of this, let alone taking the chance of showing it to someone.